Darren Blake thought he was locking out trouble when he sealed the doors of Brookvale Mart, but within minutes, he de-trapped himself inside a nightmare that would tear apart his quiet town and change his life forever. Brookvale was the kind of town people drove through without noticing. It sat quietly between long stretches of farmland where the main street had only one grocery store, a diner, a pharmacy, and the small but busy Brookvale Mart. Everyone knew everyone, or at least recognized the same familiar faces at the checkout counters. It was a comfortable place where nothing truly bad ever happened. People left their cars unlocked, trusted the neighborhood kids to watch their pets, and believed that crime belonged somewhere else. That sense of peace began to fade slowly, so quietly that most didn't realize it until it was too late. It started with small things: missing candy bars, empty hangers, misplaced batteries. The employees at Brookvale Mart assumed it was just bad inventory or careless customers. Nobody imagined someone would steal from their little store. But over the next few weeks, the missing items became more frequent. Shelves that had been neatly stocked were suddenly half empty by the end of the day. Receipts didn't match the numbers. Something wasn't right. Darren, the store manager, took the first complaints lightly. He had been working there for years and thought he'd seen it all: mistakes, returns, and even the occasional prank by bored teenagers, but this was different. He started checking the security footage, only to find that the cameras near the exits had gone blurry, as if someone had smeared them with fingerprints. The few clips that were clear enough showed shapes that moved quickly, faces hidden beneath hoodies and caps. They never seemed rushed, never looked suspicious, and always left before anyone noticed. Word spread around town that Brookvale Mart had a shoplifting problem. At first, people treated it like gossip. Locals whispered about it while drinking coffee at the diner, each person claiming they knew who was responsible. Some said it was teenagers from the next town over. Others believed it was strangers passing through, taking advantage of small-town trust. Whatever the truth was, the idea that someone could be stealing right under their noses made people uneasy. Shop owners along the main street began locking up earlier than usual. The pharmacy installed new cameras, and the diner started keeping its cash register behind a sliding metal cover. The local police made extra rounds at night, though most of the time they saw nothing. Even with the precautions, the thefts continued. Items kept disappearing, not just from Brookvale Mart, but from other stores too. Small things at first, but soon more valuable products: phones, watches, and expensive beauty supplies. It felt coordinated, as if someone knew exactly what they wanted and how to get away with it. By late autumn, Brookvale didn't feel like the same place anymore. The easy smiles from cashiers turned into cautious glances. Customers began to look at one another differently, wondering who might be responsible. Rumors turned into fear, and fear grew into frustration. Darren started keeping a log of every missing item, determined to catch whoever was doing this. He didn't know it then, but the quiet unease spreading through his store was only the beginning. Something much bigger was building beneath the surface, something that would soon tear apart the calm little town he thought he knew so well. Friday evenings were usually slow at Brookvale Mart. Most customers had already done their shopping for the weekend, leaving only a few regulars wandering the aisles. The sun had begun to sink behind the row of trees that lined the parking lot, painting the windows in warm orange light. Inside, the air felt calm, almost sleepy. Darren was finishing up paperwork in his small office near the back, ready to close up for the night. Everything felt routine, almost peaceful, until he caught a glimpse of something on the security monitor that made his stomach tighten. Two figures moved through the store with a strange, deliberate rhythm. They weren't chatting or browsing like normal shoppers. They drifted through aisles with their heads low, stopping only when no one else was nearby. Darren had seen them before, though he couldn't recall exactly when. They always came together, buying a few small things while somehow avoiding the cameras at the front. Tonight, they were wearing oversized jackets despite the mild weather. Every movement looked calculated. Darren watched as one of them slipped a small box from the electronics section into a sleeve, quick and confident. The other stood lookout, pretending to study a display of magazines. For a few seconds, Darren froze. He'd been preparing for this moment for weeks, convinced that whoever was stealing from his store would eventually return. He'd even installed a new locking system that allowed him to seal the front doors from his computer. His plan was simple: trap the suspects inside until the police could arrive. He took a deep breath, clicked the button, and waited. The soft click of the automatic locks echoed faintly across the empty aisles. The two shoplifters didn't notice at first. They kept moving, collecting small items, confident that they were still unseen. But when they finally headed toward the exit, something changed. The first one reached for the handle and tugged, expecting the door to swing open. It didn't. A puzzled pause, another pull, still nothing. Their heads snapped toward the checkout counters. The store was empty now except for Darren, who had stepped out from his office. His expression was firm, but there was tension in the air that he couldn't hide. The realization hit the pair instantly: they were trapped. One of them muttered something under their breath, throwing a glance toward the rear storage area. They began to move fast, pushing over displays, looking for another way out. The sound of falling shelves and clattering boxes filled the store. Darren tried to stay calm, picking up the phone to call the police, but the situation was slipping out of control. One of the thieves grabbed a metal rod from a mop bucket stand, swinging it toward the camera near the door. The lens shattered, sending sparks across the floor. The alarm sensors picked up the movement, setting off a blaring siren that filled every corner of the building. Flashing red lights bounced off the windows as panic took over. The thieves ran through the aisles, knocking over merchandise, trying every locked door they could find. Darren ducked behind the counter, shouting that the police were on their way, though his words were drowned out by the noise. In a matter of seconds, the calm little store had transformed into a storm of chaos. Outside, people passing by slowed their cars, staring at the bright lights and the faint sounds of shattering glass. No one understood what was happening yet. Inside Brookvale Mart, the trap had worked, but it had also unleashed something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The alarm screamed through the night, echoing into the parking lot and spilling across the quiet town square. The red strobe lights from inside Brookvale Mart flickered through the windows, casting wild shadows that danced across the pavement. People began gathering outside, drawn by the noise. A few onlookers stood frozen near their cars, unsure if they should help or keep their distance. Inside, Darren's heart pounded so loudly he could barely think. He had planned for a confrontation, but not for it to explode into this. The two shoplifters were no longer trying to be discreet. Panic had replaced precision. They tore down all displays, threw products to the floor, and screamed in frustration when another locked door refused to open. The air smelled of spilled detergent and fear. One of them slammed the metal rod against a shelf, the clang echoing like a gunshot. Darren tried to keep his distance, hoping to buy time until the police arrived, but every second stretched like an hour. A young cashier named Laura, who had stayed late to help with closing duties, peeked out from the back room. She saw Darren trying to calm the situation with hand gestures, his voice trembling under the alarm's shrill tone. Before she could react, one of the thieves spotted her. In an instant, the chaos shifted direction. They charged toward her, knocking over boxes as they ran. Laura slipped on a slick of spilled cleaner, hitting the floor hard. Darren rushed forward to help her, but the second thief blocked his path, swinging the rod wildly. It caught Darren's arm, sending a sharp pain through his shoulder. Fear turned into instinct. Darren pushed a heavy display rack between them, creating a barrier. Laura crawled behind the counter, clutching her bruised arm, trying to stay out of sight. The thieves, cornered but determined, spotted the front doors again. They noticed something Darren hadn't thought about: the small emergency latch at the bottom of the door frame, part of the locking mechanism that could be forced open in a power failure. One of them jammed the metal rod into it and began prying. The rod scraped and twisted until a loud snap broke through the noise. The lock gave way, and a gust of cold air rushed in. The doors swung open, setting off another shriek from the alarm system. Without hesitation, the thieves sprinted out into the night. Darren stumbled after them, shouting for them to stop, but they were already halfway across the parking lot. Headlights flashed suddenly from the far side of the plaza. A delivery truck was turning in, its driver unaware of the chaos unfolding ahead. The thieves ran directly into its path. The driver slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding sideways across the wet asphalt. Tires screeched, metal groaned, and a scream cut through the night. Then, silence. People outside ran toward the scene. The delivery truck had stopped just short of the main entrance, its front bumper dented, steam rising from under the hood. One of the thieves lay motionless near the curb while the other struggled to get up, dazed and bleeding. Darren stood frozen at the doorway, his chest heaving as the weight of what had just happened settled in. Within minutes, flashing blue lights filled the parking lot as police cars arrived. Officers rushed to secure the area, shouting commands and pulling the injured away from the wreckage. Darren finally exhaled, realizing that what started as a simple attempt to stop a theft had spiraled into something no one in Brookvale would ever forget. By the time the first police cruiser rolled into the parking lot, the scene looked like something out of a nightmare. The delivery truck idled near the curb, its engine rattling unevenly, the front bumper bent inward from the sudden stop. One of the shoplifters lay unconscious on the pavement while the other sat beside him, clutching a torn sleeve pressed against a bleeding forehead. The sound of sirens echoed off the nearby buildings, drawing a small crowd of onlookers who whispered in shock. The once quiet Brookvale Mart stood behind them with its glass doors cracked open, lights still flashing red and white, alarms howling into the night air. Darren stood by the doorway, pale and trembling. His shirt sleeve was torn, and his right arm throbbed where the metal rod had struck him. When an officer approached, he could barely speak, only managing to point toward the store and then the injured pair on the ground. The officer guided him to the side and told him to sit down. Another officer began taking statements from the few employees still inside, while paramedics rushed to treat the injured thieves. The crowd murmured quietly, phones in hand, recording what they could. For many, it was the first real crime they had ever witnessed in person. Inside the store, everything looked destroyed. Shelves were overturned, broken glass littered the aisles, and dozens of products were scattered across the floor. The air reeked of spilled cleaner and burnt wiring from the shattered security camera. The police walked through carefully, photographing every inch of damage. What they found told a story of panic more than greed: half-open bags of stolen goods, a bent metal rod smeared with fingerprints, and a dropped wallet belonging to one of the suspects. Hours passed before things started to quiet down. The injured were taken to the hospital under police escort, and the crowd outside began to drift away, leaving behind only a few curious stragglers. Reporters arrived not long after, their headlights sweeping over the debris-strewn parking lot. They asked questions Darren didn't want to answer. He kept replaying the night in his mind, wondering if he had made the right choice. Locking the doors had seemed smart at the time, but now someone was seriously hurt. By morning, the story had already spread beyond Brookvale. Local news channels called it the Brookvale Mart incident. They showed images of shattered displays and flashing lights, painting the store as the center of a violent clash. Some news anchors praised Darren's quick thinking for stopping the thieves. Others questioned whether he had gone too far. People online began debating who was really at fault: the criminals who started the chaos or the store manager who trapped them inside. Investigators uncovered more as the hours went by. The two suspects weren't first-time offenders. They'd been part of a small group moving from town to town, stealing small electronics and selling them in nearby cities. Brookvale was just their latest stop, another easy target they thought would go unnoticed. When officers searched their car, they found a trunk filled with stolen goods from other stores across the county. For Darren, the discovery offered little comfort. He couldn't shake the images of that night: the panic, the screams, the crash. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the moment the doors opened and the chaos spilled out into the dark. Brookvale had always been a peaceful town, but after that night, it felt different. The sense of safety everyone once took for granted had vanished, replaced by a quiet, lingering unease that no one could ignore. Winter settled over Brookvale in the months that followed, bringing with it a silence that felt heavier than the falling snow. The parking lot of Brookvale Mart, once filled with chatter and the hum of car engines, now seemed quieter, as though the air itself carried the memory of that night. The broken glass had been replaced, the shelves rebuilt, and the security systems upgraded, but no amount of repair could erase what people had seen. Every time someone pushed open the store's door, the faint echo of alarms seemed to linger in their minds. Darren stayed for a while after the incident, determined to see the store recover. The owners called him brave, a man who had protected their business when it mattered most. But that praise did little to ease the guilt that weighed on him. He attended every police interview, signed every report, and tried to convince himself he'd done the right thing. Yet, each time he drove past the spot where the delivery truck had skidded to a stop, his chest tightened. He would picture the chaos, the flashing lights, the sound of tires screeching on wet pavement. Some nights he couldn't sleep at all. The two shoplifters survived their injuries and were soon charged with multiple counts of theft, property damage, and assault. Their names were released to the public, and the news confirmed that they were part of a small, organized ring operating across several towns. During the trial, one of them expressed remorse, admitting they had never intended for things to turn violent. The other sat quietly, eyes fixed on the courtroom floor, unmoved by the judge's words. Both were sentenced to prison. For most people in Brookvale, that was the end of it. Justice had been served. But for Darren, the verdict didn't feel like closure. It only reminded him of how quickly things had spiraled out of control. As winter melted into spring, life in Brookvale began to find its rhythm again, though not quite the same one it had before. Shoppers returned to the plaza, but they were more cautious now. Conversations were quieter, glances lingered longer, and every unfamiliar face drew subtle suspicion. The town had learned that danger could hide behind ordinary smiles. Businesses formed a watch group, sharing footage and updates through a messaging app. What had once been a community built on trust was now one bound together by vigilance. Darren eventually decided to leave. He packed his things, handed in his resignation, and moved to a nearby city where no one knew his name or the story that followed him. He told people he simply needed a change, though deep down he knew he was running from the weight of Brookvale's memory. On his last night in town, he drove past the plaza one final time. The lights of Brookvale Mart glowed softly against the dark, just as they always had, but to him, it looked different now, less like a store and more like a place haunted by what could never be undone. In the years that followed, the story of that night became part of local folklore. People retold it with small variations, each version shaping the events in a slightly different light. Some remembered Darren as a hero who stood up for his town, while others whispered that he'd gone too far, that locking those doors had set everything in motion. But no matter how the story was told, one thing always remained the same: Brookvale changed that night. The innocence it once carried disappeared, leaving behind a quiet awareness that even the safest places can crumble when fear takes hold. And for those who lived through it, the memory lingered, a reminder that peace can shatter faster than anyone ever expects.